let's bring in our first guest of the day because we got a busy day and we have a bunch of moves. Obviously, we didn't get to that we could break down with our first guest, Eno Sarris from the Athletic, joining us right now. Eno, great to see you. And we might as well just pile on here right now. Your thoughts on the Teoscar Hernandez deal for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and also we're mixing in the fact that the Boston Red Sox did not quite give him a good enough offer to be enticing.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because it's not the type of player that sometimes ages all that well, because you're talking about a guy who chases and pitches outside the zone, strikes out a lot, doesn't walk a lot. But for the Dodgers, I think he's a perfect fit because they've got a disciplined team. They were like second in OBP, second in walk rate. They don't chase a lot. And so to have this type of player on your roster, I've always thought that like lineup diversity matters, like why not have the guy who's kind of swinging from his heels and just being all crazy? Maybe he'll get white hot, in the playoffs where you've had all these really disciplined professional hitters sometimes go cold, So, they got their kind of Adolis Garcia type, where it's like this guy could just go nuts in a playoffs and actually kind of like he might be the best hitter in a playoff series that has Ohtani, Freeman, and Betts on it. So I think that putting them on the Dodgers makes the most sense, and that's why they went to the bigger number.
Who else are the Dodgers going to sign? Are they going to sign Montgomery? Are they going to sign Snell? Are they going to sign? Who else? Who else is out there that the Dodgers could possibly figure out? Stroman. Let's see who else. What other starting pitchers are out there?
All of them.
All of them. They're just going to sign everybody at this point. They're going to go for. They already have an all-star team.
They could use another starter though, right?
Yeah, no, I could totally see them adding a starter. Right now, if you look at their depth chart, I think their fifth and sixth starters are both rookies in terms of Emmett Sheehan and Gavin Stone. Those guys have options. I think most teams would rather have the young guys that have options like that start in the minor leagues. So I think it'll be more like a fifth starter type. I like the Ryu one actually. But maybe the fifth starter for the Dodgers is more like Shota Imanaga, who I really like. He struck out like nearly 30% of the guys he saw in Japan last year, and I think he's a really interesting player. So maybe fifth starter for the Dodgers is like
he's a fly ball pitcher. He's a fly ball pitcher. He's a fly ball pitcher.
That's good in that ballpark.
I know, but like all these teams, like, well, he's a fly ball pitcher. Like, can we he's good. Like, let's just sign him. Like,
is that $100 million?
It goes back, to what we were talking about before, that like teams talk themselves out of signing guys more than they seem to talk themselves into it. And if you're Imanaga and you're like, okay, we're the Red Sox or we're the Yankees or we're looking for a pitcher. Oh, he's too many fly balls. Who cares if he gets guys out? You're not pitching in Coors Field. You're not pitching in, Cincinnati, Great American Small Park. Gosh, I don't know. I feel like teams need to talk themselves in more than out of free agents.
Yeah, Nestor Cortez has been a really good pitcher for the Yankees, and he has a big fly ball rate. He's given up some homers, but he strikes guys out, and he has a really nice fastball with a lot of ride. That's what Imanaga brings to the table. He would actually, I was just looking at this, he would have the most ride of any fastball in the big leagues the day he gets there. So, this is an exciting guy with a really unique fastball that people haven't seen, short left-hander. I think, it's an ideal situation because he's 30. You don't have to give him the Yamamoto deal either. It'll be, I think, less than 100 million or around there. So I think that he's maybe one of the best. It's obviously Snell is the best, but Imanaga versus Montgomery, like, I don't know, man. If Montgomery's going to get $50 million more, I might take Imanaga myself.
But who has the best stuff? If you're looking at, like, you said Snell's the best, so that eliminated that question, who you think is the best. Is it Josh Hader's fastball that's available? Is it Snell's curveball, slider thing, his down pitch? Is it Shota's fastball? Who has the best stuff? And teams like the Dodgers, to me, or the Rays, obviously the Rays aren't in on these guys, but that's how they exploit the value in these guys. Hey, you're going to throw your curveball. You're going to throw your fastball 80% of the time. I know you'll get whacked sometimes, but we're coming out on top 95% of the time.
No, I think that's really interesting because if you look at Jordan Montgomery, I feel like he's maxed out. I think he was great. He was great in the playoffs. He's been a really good pitcher, but I don't look at what he does and be like, oh, what if he threw this pitch more? Or like, what if he did this? I don't see that much left to tweak. He is who he is. With Imanaga, he's been pitching to contact in a league that pitches to contact, that plays to contact. He might not be actually throwing the ball up in the zone as much as you want. So there might be a tweak where you say, man, maybe part of the reason why you're giving up homers is you're throwing this high ride fastball down in the zone. Come to the big leagues in America where we throw high in the zone a lot. We throw our fastballs high, higher, and highest. So, I feel like there could be more tweaks with Imanaga. So that's why I'm most excited about him. In terms of stuff, yes, I would probably put Snell's slider number one remaining, and then Imanaga's fastball number two. And I don't think that Montgomery actually has a pitch that would rank in that top 3 or to 5 in terms of best stuff. But he's a guy that has high pitchability, has a good arsenal, knows what he's doing with the pitches he has. So I'm not here to say that Montgomery's bad, but if I'm running an organization, I'm really excited about Imanaga. That's the one I want because I feel like he's got demonstrated stuff, but he also has some things I could tweak about him.
So you're not paying for starts. You're not paying Aaron Nola because he makes every start since 2017, or Jordan Montgomery.
Well, I don't mind the Nola deal, but I do think that especially with veteran pitchers, what you've seen is a lot of these teams are getting injured guys. You get Tyler Glass now. You do a trade for Chris Sale. There's a lot of teams that are okay with getting injury guys, and I think the thing is, the injury list is a free place to stash somebody. Like if you have a veteran who's either really good or injured and you can put them on your injury list and get a roster spot, I feel like that makes more sense sometimes than a young pitcher where you don't know if he's really good and, you don't know where to stash him, in the 40-man roster, in terms of like, what you do with him. He's not necessarily going to be injured right away. So if you're wondering about why teams are okay with doing this, like low innings, high risk injury guys, I think it has something to do with how the injury list works, how the roster works. And then also those teams, I think, say, well, I can have Emmett Sheehan come up if Tyler Glasnow is hurt. I'd rather have Tyler Glasnow when he's healthy. And I think that my young guys can step in when he's not. So there's a sort of a two-pronged answer to why teams feel like, I can take the lower innings guy.
That's a great point. And we're talking to Chris L after we chat with you. And I mean, if you look at Atlanta, there's another example for you where you're trying to find a loophole in a game that is struggling to find consistent innings. Well, use up your IL spot. I think that makes a ton of sense for teams, especially that can afford it. So let me take you to the richest team in baseball, not acting like that this offseason, but I'm not knocking them at all. They've spent plenty of money in the past. It just doesn't seem like they're going for it. I'm talking about the Mets. So they added Bader last week. They've added Tyrone Taylor and Adrian Hauser, and now they add Sean Manaea, who some people are pretty high on based on some of the changes he made last season and adding the sweeper. What are your thoughts on Manaea and the Mets offseason? The only thing that's confusing to me, is, they're not really going for it this coming season. They were like kind of Yamamoto or a bust. So it seems like they're preparing themselves for 2025, no?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of treading water happening in New York here in terms of the Mets. I think they want to maybe keep a spot open for Juan Soto. They want to be available to, for the really high end stuff. And I think maybe what they've seen is that they don't want to get stuck with these mid-level contracts. And I don't know if stuck is the right word with Starling Marte. Like, I think he was just hurt and he can return to grace. Like, I think he'll be fine again. But it is, if you make too many of those mid-level contracts, the 4 and 80 type deals, you can get like a kind of a bloated roster and not have much flexibility. So that's the deal they've been away from, right? You said they were in on Yamamoto. They were cool with 300 million, but they haven't gone and signed anybody for 60 million. So they want to be, 1 and 10 or, 10 and 300. That seems to be the plan going forward. And the way that I read that is treading water. It's waiting for Brett Beatty or Mark Vientos to step forward. It's waiting for some of the younger guys to come up. It's waiting for the changes they've made to their pitching development to, they're building a pitching lab and they've been really, going out there and getting the best pitching coaches they can find. So they want to develop a pipeline, much like maybe the Rays have or the Dodgers have, where they're just always adding young, inexpensive pitchers to the rotation. And that makes everything else easier to do in terms of roster building. So I think they're kind of treading water in between season. But if you look at it, they could make the playoffs, right? Like they're a good enough team to be a wild card team. But yeah, you'd expect a little bit more out of Steve Cohen saying like we're going to win this in 5 years, and and coming out here and spending a bunch at the beginning. This seems like a little bit underwhelming of an offseason compared to what they've done before.
That's what I was going to ask you about, possibly making the playoffs. But isn't this eerily similar to when Andrew Friedman went to the Dodgers and he was like, "Hey, I need some bridge money to get to build what we're going to build." Maybe the Mets are, if you think about it in the minor leagues, like we're at like high A now, so it's going to be 2-3 years till we start getting just a cavalcade of players coming in, like the Dodgers did, and then we're going to continue to add money. Is this the bridge years where they're going to still spend some money to just bridge it to that time? Or do you think they're actually going to make a push, say, at the trade deadline, and if they're 3 games out of the wild card?
Yeah, 3 games out of the wild card. I think they'll make a small move. I think you've read it right. I think the model right now for most teams is the Dodgers, and the idea is you spend money on the major league team in a sort of big way at the beginning, and while you're doing that, you may not even think that that's going to be the team that wins it. That's the team that's just going to win some games, keep fans coming to the park. And what you're really doing is under the hood. You're really trying to improve your player development process. And, that can then be used in a couple different ways. Like the Dodgers use their player development to keep their 5, 6, 7, and 8 pitchers are all cheap, Emmett Sheehan, Gavin Stone, but they also traded away a bunch of guys, Josiah Gray, there's a whole long list of prospects that they developed that they then just use to trade away for veterans. So there's a couple different ways that having a good player development system can help you. And I think that's what the Mets are working on right now under the hood, trying to keep the team respectable. Maybe they make the playoffs, but really we're trying to develop better systems on the minor league level.
I'm sure you've noticed the Giants and the Mariners trade. I get it from the Giants side. Robbie Ray is a great left-handed pitcher when he's healthy. From the Mariners side, I know they have a lot of starting pitching, but man, they just really wanted Mitch Haniger back, because this seems like just a straight salary dump, at least from the outside looking in. And I feel like, gosh, if I'm a Mariners fan, I'm like, here we go again. We've already said we're only trying to win this amount of games, and we're not trying to win every game. And now we're dumping a guy who won a Cy Young, and we're waiting for him to come back. And I know they have Castillo and Gilbert and all those guys, but gosh, he's pretty good when he's healthy. And then, Mitch Haniger, he's okay.
Yeah, it's just wild to me that they've made so many moves, and yet I think this team is like a half win or a win better. It's like they're really trying to do the paperclip thing where they're turning the paperclip into a house, and to end up back with Mitch Haniger after all the paperclip dealings, it's like, no, man, you just got the paperclip back. So I don't know, replacing Teoscar Hernandez with the guy that Teoscar Hernandez replaced is just super weird for me. But I like Luke Raley. I like the Mitch Garver signing. I think this team is a little bit better than it was last year, but I think they only have $5 to $8 million left, and their starting infield is Luis Urias, J.P. Crawford, Johan Rojas, and Ty France. Like, is that a bottom 5 infield in the big leagues?
It's not a top 5 infield. I know that.
Yeah, no, it's not a top 5.
It's not the Dodgers it's not the Dodgers or the Braves, I promise you, or the Phillies.
Exactly. So, maybe they've been acting like a team with money constraints. Maybe their TV situation is leading to this, but it's not super exciting as a Mariners fan to be like, oh man, this was the offseason. We did a bunch of trades and we had the same flaws that we had last year, pretty much.
But you you just said it a couple times. They're a little bit better than they were last year. That's
Yeah.
all it took to overtake the Rangers. If you said they're 2 games better than they were last year, they're in and the World Series champions are out. So maybe they didn't need to. Do you believe with that pitching staff? To me, when the season starts, we're going to stop talking about how much they didn't spend, and we're not going to talk about it a ton until the end of the season and Cal Raleigh comes out again and says, see what those guys over there did? And those guys over there were the Rangers, and they just squeaked in. When he said that, they didn't win the World Series. So with this starting rotation, as to me, elite as it is,
Yeah.
with Gilbert and Castillo and
Kirby.
yeah, like I feel like this is. Are we making too much of it? Yes, I'd love to see them spend, but are we making too much of it because of the starting rotation that they have and how they can make elite bullpen pieces?
Yeah, and it's like it's a little bit hard to hit in Seattle. It's a tough park, and so maybe they're just leaning into it right now. By wins above replacement, they are the 10th best team in baseball in terms of projected wins above replacement on their roster. So 10th best team in baseball. You make a run at it, and the Rangers are going to have some injury issues in that rotation. By the end of the season, they all get healthy, but at the beginning of the season, who's pitching in that Rangers rotation? I think the Astros are showing some cracks and getting older, so they're gettable. Yeah, it's a plan to win 88 wins again and hope the other guys don't win 88 or win 88 wins and actually get lucky and make it 90 or 92. You're right. Last year, 90 won the division. They weren't that far off, and they're a little bit better.
Do we really think they're better, though? Do we think they're better? Honestly, do you really think they're better than where they were last year?
Like 56%?
Like they went from 54 to 54.2%?
Trolls.
I mean, that's how I think of it. Like they're barely better. I mean, like Rayleigh is probably better.
They weren't okay. So
Rayleigh's better than
Julio wasn't
Kelnick
very
right
good.
now. Is Rayleigh better than Kelnick right now?
Julio wasn't good at the beginning, though, and then he got
was
hotter than shit for about 2 months.
He had a good year.
And then he kind of fell off at the end a little bit.
Haniger's
Ty
not
France
as good
did
as
not very good
Teoscar.
year. They lost Teoscar. They got
Yeah.
Mitch Garver for their DH.
Traded away Gino, who
They got rid
actually
of
was
Gino,
a
who
big
was
clubhouse
huge,
guy,
huge
too.
in the club, and he would run into 25 to 30.
Yeah, I was going to say 29 pumps.
Yeah. No,
I'd say they're about the same as last year, actually.
I agree.
Okay, so they're short. So that's and they traded away, but they were traded away. I know Robbie Ray didn't pitch last year, but
Yeah.
they traded away a guy they were kind of counting on to come in and be another starter for them.
If
I don't
one or
think they
two of their
were.
young starters goes down, they are screwed.
Yeah.
Well, that's why they got the Scafani back. But yeah,
Right.
I don't think that the next group, Emerson Hancock, Darren McCon, that those guys, they're not as good as the last group. This is the culmination of their best group of minor leaguers. So this should be the time. This is the time for them. That's why it's frustrating as a fan, right? Because there's like, hey, couldn't you have, what about Matt Chapman? Even Matt Chapman would make this team better.
They should have traded for Juan Soto. The thing that I think everyone's so
They should have signed Ohtani.
I'm very plugged in.
It's $2 million a year to sign Ohtani. I don't get it.
I'm very plugged in. I'm an insomniac. I watch a ton of games. I love Dave Sims on the call. This team is going to have the same-ish, basically the same. I mean, some people are saying a little less. About the same payroll as last year, which was a disappointment for them even last year that their payroll was at that mark. It's Seattle. It's top 10 attendance. Like they are doing well on many fronts. They should not be at the 140-ish range for their payroll on the years that their winning window is going all in or supposed to be, right? They did the tanking, the lowering the payroll. They're not even back to what their payroll was in like the Robinson Cano days and all that. And also obviously with inflation, like they should be closer to the $200 million range. And if they were, in my mind, they're a World Series contender.
This team would be so much better if it had two more offensive free agents on it.
Yep, that's what they're missing. All right, a couple other things I want to get to before we let you go for Chris Sale. A couple articles for you. So first off, we really liked your Luis Severino article on the potential of tipping pitches, and I wanted to get your thoughts on what you think he could be for the Mets in 2024. Is this a guy that if he does kind of fix himself mechanically and he's healthy, can he be the old Luis Severino? It's not like he's super old yet. I think he's like 29.
Yeah, and I think what's amazing is that his fastball velocity last year was the best it had been in 4 years. So it's not like he's lost the velo yet. And I know that for anybody who watched him as a Yankee last year, they might think he's washed. The slider wasn't quite as good. The movement on the fastball wasn't quite as good. I mean, those are things he's shown before that he can find again. And then we found this thing that we had, rival advanced scouts being like, yeah, he was tipping pitches. And I found a still where he's got his glove open and he's picking his pitch, and there's a guy on second base just looking at it, you know? So I know it's a little bit frustrating. Somebody say, well, dude, this guy has 700 plus innings. He's 29 years old and he's still tipping pitches, like, isn't that on him? And I get that, but the way that we find tips now has really gone into the stratosphere in terms of the technology that we use. So we use Hawkeye now to find tips, and we can throw it into a software, and the software will just highlight, this elbow is different, and this, and when he does sliders, this is different. When he does changeups, this is different. And it just makes it really easy for a hitter to watch some video and be like, oh, okay, got to watch this. And then I'll see curveballs, or if I watch this, it's probably a changeup. So like, the way that the science of tipping is through the roof. And so, it's not all on Severino. On some level, like, it's Severino, the coaches, and the technology getting so good. So, but I do have hope that he can fix those tips and be a better pitcher going forward.
You're saying there's technology that is picking up tips, or you're saying that there's coaches who are picking it up, and then we're using technology to highlight, like, compare?
No, it's actually it's the first thing you said. The technology picks up the tips, and then the coaches are watching this thing that basically highlights, like, if I have in the piece a thing where, like, Severino's effort level is way higher on four seamers, and you can see his leg fly out, and what the coaches do is look at this thing. This technology spits out what they think are some tips. The coaches are now at the level where they're deciding if they bring that to the player or not, if they think that's a real tip or not. But it's almost like what AI does in the real world, what ChatGPT does in the real world, is sort of bring up the floor. So it does a lot of the base work for you. So the technology of tipping is saying, hey, here, the software says these 5 things could be tips. The coach looks at it and says, I don't think the hitters can see that one or that one, but that's a problem. So we're going to work on that one. But yeah,
okay.
the technology is spitting out tips.
Okay, let me ask you this, because I know the answer, but this is a rhetorical question. It's like, Scott, you never stepped in the batter's box, okay? Let me explain to you how tipping works, because this is great that you're saying, like, his elbow's different, his effort level's different. Guess what? As a hitter, you can't see that shit, okay? You can see if his glove is higher, if his glove is wider, if his glove is set different way. Hell, there was guys that tip with their mouth. They stuck their tongue out on certain pitches, right? There was guys that tip with their eyes. They'd look a certain way instead of looking this way, right, on different pitches. You can see that as a hitter. But as a hitter, I can't tell you in the amount of time that I have to hit the ball, if his hand is here, his elbow is lower, higher, whatever. You don't have time. So, like, yeah, technology, that sounds cool, like what you're saying. It's not real world, though. Like, there's no real world action. Jared Weaver used to go behind his back, right? And you'd be like, God, I can see what pitch. No, it's too fast. It's gone. Because then you're looking behind his back when you need to be looking in the window right here, right?
Yeah.
So it's cool what you're saying, but as a player and as a person that's been in that batter's box, and I'm not knocking you because I'll just knock Scott because he thinks he's a player. You've never said that, okay? But that's not real world. Now, that might help you develop into more consistent, like, they talk about tunneling. Yes, you can move that and use that for the tunneling. But as far as tipping, it happens too fast. What you talked about with him and the runner on second and the way he held his glove, that's real world tipping, right? Like, there was a guy that held his glove here, and then when he was, like, on a fastball, and then he'd lower it, you could see, like, his nose. Or on his fastball, you couldn't see his nose, and then whoop, and he's throwing something else, right? Sidney Ponson, remember him? He used to not wear sleeves. He would hold it down by his waist, and if you would see his forearm muscles wiggle, he was throwing an off-speed pitch, right? But if his forearm stayed still, it was a fastball. Like, things like that. Edwin Jackson, we traded for him. In the windup, he'd go over his head, fastball, and on breaking ball, he'd stop right here, right? Things like that stuff you can pick up as a hitter because you have enough time to calculate it in your brain. But like where the guy's elbow is and his effort level, yeah, that looks cool on video. You ain't got no fucking chance in the batter's box. The guy's throwing 100 at you. You got 50,000 people telling you suck. It's just not real. I appreciate what you're saying, but that's just a more real world approach from a player.
Well, I mean, that's why I think, the coaches look at it and then they decide what they think is actually actionable. I've even had advanced scouts be like, we're kind of going away from just using the tipping machine, using the software, because we're finding more like from what you're talking about of just like watching the game and looking for those types of tips. But I just wanted to put it out there as like, that's a thing that teams are doing now in terms of, what they're looking at. What they bring to the player, you're right, is different. And the only other thing that I'd push back on, because I totally get what you're saying. There's like a big piece of research from cricket that said that pre-release information, I know cricket's not baseball, but it's close, that pre-release information was much more important than post-release information. And so all the stuff that we're talking about, whether it be traditional tipping or differences in effort level or things that the pitcher does differently in his mechanics, you may not be able to tell me that's why you swung at that pitch, but on some level, your brain is looking at that and being like, whoa, something's different. And, like telling you something. It's not something you can tell me with your words, because hitting is, I think, just so reactive that like I asked Mookie Betts what he saw coming out of the hand. He says, I can't tell you. I don't know. I don't know. And so I think that there, like, sometimes you might actually see some of that stuff and not know why you swung at that, not know why you thought it was a fastball, but it had something to do with the way their body moved. That's the only way I'd push back. Maybe I'm wrong. But I do know that like hitting is, like primal is the way I'd put it. Like you are seeing the ball and reacting, and it's milliseconds. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, you're reacting to what is natural. That's why the four-seam fastball that rides more gets swung and missed at, because your mind knows that that ball is going to drop the natural 16 inches of gravity. And if it only drops 9 inches, it's elite. If it drops 6 inches, it's Cy Young caliber. My question is, Severino, do the Mets really think like the Yankees didn't know he was tipping? Or is this just, hey, it's a one-year deal, we're going to see if it works? Or do they feel like they can unlock this? Or was what you were talking about just from another rival executive?
No, they knew that the Yankees knew this.
Yeah.
I think that it's a little bit like, hey, why not? Like, in terms of like, you saw the 1-year deals, right? You got Jack Flaherty, Lance Lynn, Luis Severino. I think basically with all of them, you're saying, well, I don't trust, it enough to be like, I'm going to give you 3-4 years. This is a 1-year sort of situation. But for me, Severino has the highest upside of those 1-year deals, and I think it's partially because of the tipping and partially just, can we just get that fastball movement back to where it used to be?
I like that. And he is 29. I looked it up. That's confirmed. I may not have played, but I do know how to use Google. Great having you on. Appreciate the combo. Big fan of your work. And people can check out that article on Severino and the pitch tipping if you check out Eno on The Athletic, or look him up at Eno Sarris. Thanks, Eno.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.